Montana Territory, 1874. The first gunshot split the air like thunder, sending Delilah Summers ducking behind an overturned wagon. The second shot splintered wood inches from her face, showering her with debris. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the small leather-bound journal to her chest, the only thing she had managed to salvage before the bandits descended. "Run, miss!" shouted the stagecoach driver before a third shot silenced him forever. Delilah gathered her skirts and fled toward the tree line, her 20-year-old legs carrying her faster than she'd ever moved before. The crisp autumn air burned in her lungs as she ran, her chestnut hair coming loose from its pins. Behind her, men's voices shouted commands as they ransacked what remained of the stage. "Find the girl. Boss wants no witnesses." Tears blurred her vision as she pushed deeper into the pines. She'd known the journey to Silver Creek would be dangerous, but nothing had prepared her for this. The dense forest floor muffled her footsteps as branches clawed at her blue calico dress, already smudged with dirt and blood that wasn't her own. The letter in her reticule promised a new beginning, schoolteacher position in a frontier town that desperately needed educated women. After losing her parents to influenza last winter, Delilah had sold nearly everything to purchase the stagecoach ticket west, clinging to the belief that the frontier represented hope and possibility. Now she was simply trying to survive the day. A fallen log provided momentary shelter as she caught her breath, listening for pursuit. The forest had grown quiet, too quiet, even the birds had ceased their calling. Delilah pressed her palm against her mouth to quiet her breathing when a twig snapped nearby. She wasn't alone. 30 miles away, Rylan Wade adjusted his hat against the late afternoon sun, surveying the valley below with a practiced eye. At 26, he'd already spent a decade working cattle across 3 territories, and the last 3 years building the Saddleback Ranch into something that was finally his own. "Riders coming," said Hank, his wizened ranch hand pointing toward a dust cloud approaching from the east. Rylan nodded, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his Colt revolver. "Looks like 4, maybe 5 horses." "Trouble?" asked Hank. "Always is these days," Rylan replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling inside him. The Blackwell gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, hitting stages, stealing cattle, and leaving few survivors. Just last week, they'd burned the Thompson place to the ground, killing the old man and stealing his horses. Rylan had built the Saddleback from nothing, working himself to exhaustion for 3 straight years. His small herd of cattle had grown, the cabin was finally weathertight, and he'd started to carve out something resembling a life. But in this corner of Montana Territory, progress was always tenuous. One harsh winter, one raid by rustlers, one mistake could erase everything. "I'll ride out to meet them," Rylan said, swinging onto his buckskin gelding. "Keep the rifle ready just in case." As he rode, Rylan couldn't help but reflect on the solitude of his existence. The vast, open country spread before him like a painting, mountains purple with distance, golden prairie grass swaying in the wind, the smell of pine sharp in his nostrils. It was beautiful, but beauty didn't keep a man warm at night or ease the loneliness that settled in his bones during the long winter months. Women were scarce in Silver Creek, and those who were there were mostly married or working girls at the saloon. Rylan had decided long ago that love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Better to focus on survival, on building something tangible. Feelings complicated things made a man vulnerable. Out here, vulnerability got you killed. As the riders drew closer, Rylan recognized Sheriff Turner leading the group. His gut tightened. The sheriff never rode out this far unless something was seriously wrong. "Wade," Turner called, reining his horse to a stop. Stagecoach was hit about 12 miles east, Blackwell's gang from the looks of it. "Anyone survive?" Rylan asked, already knowing the answer. "Driver and shotgun messenger are dead." 2 male passengers too. Turner wiped sweat from his brow. There was supposed to be a young woman aboard, new schoolteacher for Silver Creek. No sign of her body, but there's blood trails heading into the forest. Rylan frowned. "You think she ran?" "Maybe, could be they took her, could be she's bleeding out in the woods somewhere." The sheriff sighed. We're organizing search parties. Figured I'd ask if you could spare yourself and maybe one of your hands to help look. You know that Eastern Territory better than most." Rylan nodded. "I'll help. Hank can watch the place." He didn't mention that he'd been tracking the Blackwell gang for months, mapping their movements, planning for the inevitable day when they'd come for his cattle, or worse. "We're splitting up to cover more ground," Turner said. "Can you take the northeastern quadrant toward Devil's Backbone? It's rough country, but if she's hiding, that's where I'd go." "I'll head out now," Ryland said, already turning his horse. "Daylight's wasting." As he rode east, Ryland tried to ignore the heaviness in his chest. Another life cut short by the brutality of the frontier. The new schoolteacher had probably been some city girl with romantic notions about the West, unaware that the beautiful landscapes concealed deadly threats. The territory had a way of destroying innocence, of teaching harsh lessons through blood and loss. He'd learned that lesson himself at 16, when outlaws killed his father and left Ryland for dead on the Kansas plains. 10 years had passed, but the scars remained, both the visible one that sliced across his left shoulder and the invisible ones that had hardened his heart. The West was no place for tenderness. A man survived by staying alert, staying armed, and staying alone. Delilah crouched lower as footsteps crunched through the underbrush. Her fingers closed around a heavy stick, a pitiful weapon against guns, but better than nothing. The approaching footsteps belonged to a single person moving slowly, cautiously. "I know you're there, girl," called a gravelly voice. "No use hiding. Won't hurt you if you come quiet." She recognized the voice as one of the bandits who had attacked the stage. Her mind raced through limited options. Stay hidden and pray, he moved on, run and risk making noise that would give away her position, or fight with nothing but a stick and desperation. The footsteps drew closer. She could hear the man's breathing now, smell tobacco and sweat. Delilah tightened her grip on the stick, summoning courage she wasn't sure she possessed. A hand suddenly clamped over her mouth from behind. She tried to scream, but the sound died against calloused fingers. "Don't move," whispered a different voice, deep and steady, directly into her ear. "I'm not with them." The stranger's free arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her backward into deeper cover, just as the bandit pushed through the brush where she'd been hiding seconds before. "Coulda sworn I saw something," the bandit muttered, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. He stood less than 10 feet from their hiding place, his revolver drawn. After a tense minute that felt like hours, he spat on the ground and moved on, continuing his search in another direction. Only when the footsteps faded did the hand release from Delilah's mouth. She twisted away, brandishing her stick as she faced her new captor. She found herself staring at a young man with eyes the color of a summer storm, gray with hints of blue. His light brown hair was partially hidden beneath a well-worn hat, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Though he was crouched low, she could tell he was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a dusty canvas jacket. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes quickly assessing her. There was no mockery in his gaze, no lecherous appraisal, just efficient concern. "No," she whispered, still clutching her makeshift weapon. "Who are you?" "Rylan Wade. I ranch north of here." He glanced in the direction the bandit had gone. "Sheriff's got search parties out looking for survivors from the stage. I'm guessing that's you." Delilah nodded, relief washing over her. "Delilah Summers. I was traveling to Silver Creek." "The new schoolteacher," he said with a nod of recognition. "We need to move. There are at least 4 more of Blackwell's men searching these woods." He stood, offering his hand. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, taking his hand and rising on shaky legs. "My father taught me." "Good, my horse is about a quarter-mile west. We need to reach him without being spotted." Rylan led the way, moving silently through the forest with a woodsman's skill. Delilah followed, grateful for his steady presence even as uncertainty gnawed at her. Her entire future had been pinned on reaching Silver Creek, on the teaching position that awaited her. Now, everything was in chaos. "The other passengers," she whispered as they paused behind a massive pine. Ryland's expression darkened. "I'm sorry." The confirmation of what she already suspected hit her like a physical blow. The kindly older couple who had shared their lunch with her, the young man traveling to meet his brother, all gone. Why would they do this? She asked, her voice breaking. The stage wasn't carrying gold or anything valuable. Blackwell doesn't need reasons, Rylan replied grimly. He kills because he can. They continued in silence until they reached a small clearing where a buckskin horse waited, tethered to a low branch. Rylan checked their surroundings before untying the animal. I'll boost you up, he said. We'll ride double until we're clear of danger. Delilah gathered her torn skirts as Rylan's hands encircled her waist, lifting her onto the saddle with surprising gentleness for a man of his strength. He swung up behind her a moment later, his chest warm against her back as he reached around for the reins. Hold on, he instructed, and she grasped the saddle horn as the horse began moving through the trees. Rylan kept them on game trails and natural pathways, avoiding open areas where they might be spotted. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks that seemed obscenely beautiful given the day's horrors. Where are we going? Delilah asked after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. My ranch, Rylan replied. It's the nearest safe place. Tomorrow I can take you to Silver Creek if that's still where you want to go. If that's still where you want to go. The words echoed in Delilah's mind. Did she? The schoolhouse would still be waiting, the children would still need teaching, but the journey had already exacted a terrible price. She thought of the letter in her reticule, the hopeful words from the town council about building a future in the West. I don't have anywhere else, she admitted quietly. Rylan said nothing, but his arm tightened fractionally around her as they rode on. The Saddleback Ranch came into view just as twilight deepened into night. It wasn't grand, a sturdy log cabin with a porch running its length, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. But to Delilah's exhausted eyes, it looked like salvation. An older man with a weathered face emerged from the barn as they approached, rifle in hand until he recognized Rylan. Found her, did you? He called, lowering the weapon. This is Miss Summers, Rylan said as he dismounted, then reached up to help Delilah down. The school teacher, Miss Summers, this is Hank. He helps me run this place. Ma'am, Hank said, touching his hat brim. Glad to see you alive. Sheriff came by looking for you both. I told him you were still searching, but he left a man in town to wait for word. I'll ride in at first light, Rylan nodded. Miss Summers needs rest and food first. Got stew on the stove, Hank said, taking the horse's reins. I'll see to your mount. Rylan led Delilah toward the cabin, and she found herself studying him in the fading light. There was a quiet confidence in his movements, a sense of purpose that seemed rare in men so young. Despite the circumstances, she felt safe in his presence, something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after witnessing such violence. The cabin's interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, wooden table and chairs, and shelves holding books that surprised Delilah with their number and variety. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom, and a ladder indicated a loft above. It's not much, Rylan said, noticing her appraisal, but it's solid. It's lovely, she replied honestly. Did you build it yourself? Most of it. Hank helped with the roof and chimney. He gestured toward a curtained alcove. There's water and soap behind there if you want to wash up. I'll find you something clean to wear for tonight. Delilah nodded gratefully and stepped behind the curtain to find a washstand with a pitcher and basin. She poured water and scrubbed the dirt and dried blood from her hands and face, wincing at the scratches that covered her arms from her flight through the forest. Her dress was likely beyond saving, torn at the hem and stained with the day's horrors. When she emerged, Rylan had placed a flannel shirt and pair of trousers on the table. They'll be too big, but they're clean, he said. I'll step outside while you change. Alone, Delilah slipped out of her ruined dress and into the offered clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. The garments smelled of soap and pine, and despite their size, she felt instantly more comfortable. She used a leather thong she found in the pocket to belt the trousers at her waist, then called, I'm decent. Rylan returned with Hank, both men carrying bowls of stew that steamed in the cool evening air. They sat at the table, and for a few minutes no one spoke as they ate. Delilah hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite of stew, venison with potatoes and carrots, touched her tongue. "Sheriff said you're from back east," Hank finally commented. "Pennsylvania, was it?" "Massachusetts," Delilah corrected. "A small town near Boston. I taught children there for 2 years before." She hesitated. "Before I decided to come west." The men didn't press for more details, which she appreciated. How could she explain that after her parents' deaths, the familiar streets and sympathetic glances had become unbearable? That the advertisement seeking a teacher in Montana Territory had seemed like Providence, a chance to build something new from the ashes of her former life. "Silver Creek's a decent town," Hank offered. "Rough around the edges, but they've been wanting a proper school for years. Kids been learning their letters from Widow Jenkins, but she's got the consumption bad now." "I've heard it's growing," Delilah said, grateful for the neutral topic. The letter from the town council mentioned new families arriving with the railroad construction. Rylan, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Town's changing fast, not all for the better." There was something dark in his tone that made Delilah curious. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes directly. "Railroad brings money. Money brings men like Blackwell looking to take what isn't theirs." "The men who attacked the stage," Delilah said, her appetite suddenly diminishing at the memory. "They've been terrorizing this territory for months," Rylan continued. "Sheriffs outnumbered and outgunned. The territorial governor promised help, but it hasn't come." "They'll get what's coming to them," Hank assured Delilah, shooting Rylan a warning glance. "Don't you worry about that now. You've had enough frights for one day." After dinner, Hank excused himself to sleep in the bunkhouse, leaving Delilah alone with Rylan. An awkward silence fell as he cleared the dishes. "You can take my bed," he said, nodding toward the bedroom door. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly take your bed," Delilah protested. "The floor would be fine for me." "It wouldn't be right," Rylan insisted. "You've been through enough today without having to sleep on hard planks." Something in his voice, a gentleness at odds with his rugged exterior, made Delilah relent. "Thank you for everything. I would be," her voice caught. "I would be dead if you hadn't found me." Rylan shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with conviction, "not anyone." Their eyes met across the small table, and Delilah felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps, of shared understanding. They were strangers thrown together by violence and chance, yet somehow she didn't feel like a stranger in his presence. "You should rest," he said, breaking the moment. "Morning comes early out here." Delilah nodded and rose. At the bedroom door she paused. "Mr. Wade, do you think it's still safe for me to go to Silver Creek, after what happened?" Rylan considered her question carefully before answering. "Nowhere's completely safe in this territory. But Silver Creek has good people who look out for each other, and it sounds like they need you." "Yes," she said softly, "I suppose they do." She offered a small smile. "Good night, Mr. Wade." "Rylan," he corrected. "Out here, formality seems a waste of breath." "Rylan," she repeated, "then I'm Delilah." In the small bedroom, Delilah found a quilt-covered bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over moonlit prairie. She slipped beneath the covers, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of the man who had saved her life. Sleep came swiftly, dragging her under before she could dwell too long on the strange turns her life had taken in a single day. Rylan woke before dawn, as was his habit. He stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil, moving quietly to avoid waking his guest. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind as he stepped onto the porch to watch the first pale light touch the eastern horizon. Delilah Summers was not what he had expected. When Sheriff Turner had mentioned a schoolteacher from back east, Rylan had imagined some prim spinster or fragile city girl. Instead, he'd found a young woman with courage enough to flee armed bandits and wit enough to stay hidden. Her chestnut hair and clear green eyes had taken him by surprise, as had the intelligence and resilience behind them. It was dangerous thinking. She was bound for Silver Creek, for a life teaching children and civilizing the frontier. His life was here, building something from nothing, always watching the horizon for threats. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more. Yet he couldn't deny the unsettling effect she'd had on him. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to notice a woman as more than a passing presence. Years of believing that attachment was a luxury he couldn't afford. The door opened behind him, and Delilah stepped onto the porch. She'd changed back into her torn dress, though she'd clearly tried to mend it as best she could. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Rylan replied, turning to face her. "Coffee's almost ready." Delilah moved to stand beside him at the porch railing, gazing out at the landscape that was slowly taking shape in the growing light. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already catching the sun's first rays while the valley remained in shadow. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "different from Massachusetts, bigger somehow." "Makes a man feel small," Rylan agreed, "in a good way most times." "I can see why you chose this place," Delilah said, glancing at him. "Didn't exactly choose it," he admitted. "Land was cheap because it's hard. Nobody wanted to try ranching this far north, but the water's good and the grass grows thick in summer." "You've built something wonderful," she said with sincerity. "Something to be proud of." Her words touched something in Rylan that he usually kept well guarded. Pride in what he'd accomplished, yes, but also awareness of what was missing. Standing beside this perceptive young woman as dawn broke over his land, the solitude that normally comforted him suddenly felt hollow. "It's a start," he said simply. "Come inside. You should eat before we ride to town." Over a breakfast of biscuits and bacon, Rylan explained his plan. "I'll take you to Silver Creek today. Sheriff needs to know what you saw. Then you can decide if you still want to take that teaching position." "What other choice do I have?" Delilah asked, not bitterly but pragmatically. "Everything I owned was in my trunk on that stage. All I have left is what I'm wearing and the contents of my reticule." "Town will help you get settled," Rylan assured her. "They've been waiting for a teacher for months." "Did you attend school, Rylan?" she asked, curiosity in her green eyes. "Some, enough to read and cipher. My father believed in education even out here." He paused. "He was killed when I was 16, outlaws like the ones who hit your stage." Delilah's expression softened with understanding. "I lost my parents last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "It's strange, isn't it?" she reflected. "How loss can shape your entire path. If they had lived, I never would have answered that advertisement. Never would have come west. Never would have been on that stage," Rylan added quietly. "Never would have met you," Delilah countered, holding his gaze. Something passed between them then, a current of mutual recognition that made Rylan look away first. He wasn't used to someone seeing so clearly into his thoughts. "We should go," he said, rising from the table. "It's a 2-hour ride to Silver Creek." As they prepared to leave, Hank pulled Rylan aside. "You be careful, boy." Blackwell's men could still be watching the roads. "I know," Rylan nodded. "We'll stick to the ridge trail, less exposed." "It ain't just that," Hank said, lowering his voice. "That girl's got something about her." "I see how you look at her." "I just found her in the woods, Hank. Don't make it more than it is." The older man shook his head. "Known you 10 years, son. Never seen you look at anyone that way." "Just saying, be careful with your heart, too." Rylan dismissed the warning with a shake of his head, but as he helped Delilah mount the spare horse they'd saddled for her, he couldn't deny the truth in Hank's words. Something about Delilah Summers had gotten under his skin in a way no one had before, and that made her dangerous in an entirely different way than Blackwell's gang. The journey to Silver Creek took them along a winding trail that followed a natural ridge, offering sweeping views of the valley below. Delilah rode well, despite her city upbringing, and Rylan found himself impressed by her comfort in the saddle. "My father believed girls should know how to ride as well as boys," she explained when he commented on her skill. "He was progressive that way, believed women deserved education and independence." "He sounds like a wise man." He was, Delilah said, a wistful smile touching her lips. He taught mathematics at a boys' school, but he always said his most promising student was me. Her expression clouded. I think he would have approved of my coming west. My mother would have been terrified. And now, Rylan asked, after yesterday. Delilah considered the question as they navigated a steep section of trail. I'm frightened, she admitted, but also determined. Those men took lives yesterday. They took my possessions. I won't let them take my purpose, too. Her answer stirred something in Ryland's chest. Admiration, certainly, but also a protective instinct that went beyond mere chivalry. This woman had a strength of spirit that matched the harshness of the frontier, yet retained a gentleness that the territory hadn't managed to crush. Silver Creek needs someone like you, he said. Someone who doesn't break easily. Is that how you see me? She asked, surprised. As someone who doesn't break. I saw you yesterday, Rylan reminded her. Most city folk would have fallen apart after what you witnessed. You found a weapon, hid yourself, and stayed clear-headed enough to survive until help arrived. I was terrified the entire time, she confessed. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear, Rylan said. It's about feeling it and moving forward anyway. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the trail wound ever closer to civilization. When they crested the final hill, Silver Creek lay before them, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a swift-flowing stream, with the gleaming rails of the new railroad spur glinting in the morning sun. It's larger than I expected, Delilah remarked. Railroad changed everything, Rylan explained. Towns doubled in size in 3 years, that's the schoolhouse there. He pointed to a white-painted building set slightly apart from the main street. As they rode into town, Rylan felt the familiar tension that always accompanied his visits to Silver Creek. He preferred the solitude of the saddleback, the simple interactions with Hank and the occasional ranch hand he hired during busy seasons. Towns meant people and people meant complications. They drew attention immediately. A handsome cowboy and a beautiful woman in a torn dress riding side by side down Main Street. Curtains twitched in windows and shopkeepers paused in their sweeping to watch them pass. Sheriff Turner emerged from his office as they approached, relief evident on his weathered face. Miss Summers, thank the Lord. When Wade didn't return yesterday, I feared the worst. They dismounted, and Rylan briefly explained how he'd found Delilah hiding in the woods and taken her to his ranch for the night. You're the only survivor we know of, Turner told Delilah gravely. I need to ask you some questions about what you saw. Might help us finally catch these bastards. Pardon my language, miss. Of course, Delilah nodded. Anything I can do to help. Miss Summers needs proper clothes and necessities first, Rylan interjected. She lost everything in the attack. Of course, the sheriff agreed. Mrs. Patterson runs the general store. She can help you get what you need, Miss Summers. Town council authorized credit for you until you receive your first month's wages. A small crowd had gathered by now, word spreading quickly about the new schoolteacher's miraculous survival. A plump woman in a calico dress pushed her way forward. I'm Margaret Patterson, she announced. My husband owns the store and I've been helping organize the school board. We've been beside ourselves with worry when the stage didn't arrive. Delilah found herself enveloped in a warm hug before being swept away toward the general store, looking back only once to meet Rylan's eyes with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She's a lucky one, Sheriff Turner commented as they watched her go. Blackwell doesn't usually leave witnesses. It wasn't luck, Rylan said. She's smart, hid herself well. The sheriff studied him curiously. Seems you've taken a shine to our new schoolmarm. Just doing what anyone would, Rylan replied, echoing his words from the previous night, though they rang hollow even to his own ears. Well, I need your statement about where you found her. Might help us track those killers. For the next hour, Rylan detailed his search and discovery of Delilah, carefully describing the area where he'd encountered one of Blackwell's men. When he finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, frowning. This is the 4th attack in 2 months, Turner said. Governor's finally sending federal marshals, but they won't arrive for another week. Meanwhile, Blackwell gets bolder. Any idea why they're targeting this area? Rylan asked. Railroad payroll maybe, or just because they can, the sheriff sighed. Word is, Blackwell's got a particular hatred for this town. Some old grudge. Against who? No one knows for sure. Man's a ghost. Some say he used to live here under a different name before the railroad came. Ryland digested this information, adding it to what he already knew about the outlaw. James Blackwell had appeared in the territory 3 years ago, quickly assembling a gang of the worst cutthroats and killers from across the West. Their raids had started small, isolated homesteads, the occasional traveler, but had escalated to boldly attacking stagecoaches and even hitting the railroad survey camp last spring. Keep your eyes open, Wade, Turner advised. Your place is isolated, makes for an easy target. I'm always watching, Rylan assured him. When they emerged from the sheriff's office, Delilah was walking toward them, transformed. She'd exchanged her torn dress for a simple blue skirt and white blouse, her chestnut hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. Beside her walked a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples. Ah, Mr. Wade, the man called. I'm Edward Hamilton, head of the town council. I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude for rescuing our new teacher. Ryland nodded acknowledgement as Hamilton continued. Miss Summers has been telling us about her ordeal, terrible business, but she's agreed to stay and take up her position nonetheless. Shows remarkable character, wouldn't you agree? Yes, Ryland said, his eyes meeting Delilah's. Remarkable. We're getting her settled in the rooms above the millinery, Hamilton explained. Mrs. Wilson is a widow and has agreed to provide suitable chaperonage. The school term begins next Monday. It was all happening so quickly. Yesterday, Delilah had been fighting for her life in the forest. Today, she was being absorbed into the town's fabric as if the violence had been merely an unfortunate delay rather than a life-altering event. Mr. Wade, Delilah said, stepping forward, I haven't properly thanked you. She extended her hand, which he took automatically. I owe you my life. Her fingers were warm against his, the touch sending an unexpected jolt through him. You don't owe me anything, he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. Nevertheless, I'm grateful. Her green eyes held his for a moment longer than was strictly proper, conveying something deeper than her words expressed. Miss Summers will be a wonderful addition to our community, Hamilton interjected, either oblivious to or deliberately interrupting the moment between them. We have 28 children enrolled already, ages 6 to 16. The town is growing rapidly. I should be going, Ryland said, suddenly eager to escape the confines of the town and its social expectations. Miss Summers, I wish you well with your teaching. Will we see you at the harvest social next Saturday? Hamilton asked. The whole county attends. It would be an opportunity for Miss Summers to meet more of the community. Ryland rarely attended town functions, preferring the solitude of his ranch to the forced gaiety of such gatherings. But before he could frame a polite refusal, Delilah spoke. I hope you'll come, Mr. Wade, she said. It would be nice to see a familiar face among all the new ones. Put that way, how could he refuse? I'll try, he conceded, tipping his hat. Good day to you both. As Ryland rode out of Silver Creek, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. He'd rescued a woman from danger, something any decent man would do, yet he couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she'd looked at him when they said goodbye, as if she saw something in him that others missed. The way her voice had softened when she asked him to attend the social. It was foolishness, he told himself. She was educated, refined, destined to marry some shopkeeper or banker once she'd settled into town life. And he was a rancher with little to offer beyond hard work and solitude. Yet as the miles stretched between them, Ryland found himself considering Hamilton's invitation with more seriousness than he'd expected. Perhaps he would attend the harvest social after all. Delilah stood at the window of her new rooms, watching Ryland Wade ride out of town until he disappeared from view. The past 24 hours felt like a fever dream, the attack, her desperate flight through the forest, the night at Ryland's ranch, and now her sudden installation as Silver Creek's schoolteacher. "He's quite handsome, isn't he, Mrs. Wilson commented, arranging linens in the small chest of drawers. The widow was a kindly woman in her 50s who had immediately taken Delilah under her wing. "Who?" Delilah asked, though she knew precisely whom Mrs. Wilson meant. "Ryland Wade." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he keeps to himself. Ranch is doing well from what I hear. Started with almost nothing 3 years ago." "He saved my life," Delilah said simply. "Providence works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Wilson replied. "Now let me show you the schoolhouse. We've been preparing it for weeks." The schoolhouse was a simple structure, with rows of benches facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform. A blackboard covered most of the front wall, and bookshelves, woefully underfilled, lined the back. Windows let in ample light, and a pot-bellied stove stood ready for winter's chill. "It's not what you're used to, I expect, Mrs. Wilson said apologetically. "Nothing like those fine Eastern schools." "It's perfect," Delilah assured her, already envisioning how she would arrange the space, what books she would request, how she would group the children by age and ability. The next days passed in a blur of activity. Delilah gave her statement to Sheriff Turner, describing the attack in as much detail as she could bear to recall. She met with the town council to discuss curriculum and expectations. She was fitted for 2 new dresses at the dressmaker's shop and given a small advance on her salary to purchase necessities. Everyone was kind, welcoming her with genuine warmth. Yet each night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to Mrs. Wilson's gentle snoring from the next room, Delilah found her thoughts returning to Ryland Wade's cabin, to the quiet strength he embodied, to the sadness she'd glimpsed behind his gray eyes, to the way he'd treated her with respect rather than the patronizing concern most men showed toward women in distress. Saturday arrived, bringing with it the harvest social that everyone in town had been discussing all week. The event was held in the newly constructed Railroad Assembly Hall, decorated with autumn leaves, corn shocks, and ribbons in harvest colors. Delilah wore her new dress of forest green poplin, which Mrs. Wilson assured her brought out the color of her eyes. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. "You look lovely," Mrs. Wilson declared. "Every unmarried man in the county will be falling at your feet." "I'm here to teach children, not find a husband," Delilah reminded her with a smile. "One doesn't exclude the other," the widow replied wisely. "A schoolteacher needs a partner in life, same as anyone." The social was already in full swing when they arrived. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Couples danced in the center of the room, surrounded by clusters of people engaged in conversation. As the new schoolteacher, Delilah found herself the center of attention. Parents introduced themselves and their children, merchants offered welcome gifts, and young men hovered nearby, waiting for an opportunity to request a dance. She was in the middle of a conversation with the blacksmith's wife when she felt a change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift that drew her attention to the entrance. Ryland Wade stood in the doorway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean denims, a crisp white shirt and a dark vest. He'd shaved, she noticed, and his light brown hair was neatly combed beneath his best hat. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Delilah felt her heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the excitement of the evening. She excused herself from the conversation and made her way toward him. "You came," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Said I might," he replied, the hint of a smile softening his usually serious expression. "How are you settling in?" "Everyone has been very kind," Delilah told him. "The schoolhouse is ready, and classes begin on Monday." "Nervous?" "A little," she admitted, "but excited too. It feels good to have purpose again." The music changed to a waltz, and couples began moving onto the dance floor. "Would you like to dance?" Ryland asked, the question clearly costing him some effort. "I would," Delilah answered, placing her hand in his outstretched one, As they joined the other couples, Delilah was aware of curious glances and whispered comments. Clearly, Rylan Wade dancing with anyone was noteworthy, let alone with the new schoolteacher. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as they moved gracefully around the floor. Rylan, she discovered, was a surprisingly good dancer for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. "Let them," he replied. "Small towns run on gossip. And what will they say about us?" Rylan's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "That the new schoolteacher is too good for a rough rancher like me." "That's not true," Delilah said with sudden fierceness. "You're one of the finest men I've met here or in the East." Surprise flickered in his eyes at her vehemence. "You've only known me 2 days." "Sometimes 2 days is enough to take the measure of a person," she countered, "especially when those days involve life and death." The music ended before Rylan could respond, and they were immediately surrounded by others eager to meet or dance with Delilah. She was whisked away by Edward Hamilton for the next dance, then by the banker, then by the young telegraph operator. Throughout the evening, she was acutely aware of Rylan's presence, even when they were separated by the width of the hall. He spoke with the sheriff and a few ranchers, declined to dance with anyone else, and occasionally caught her eye across the room with a look that made her pulse quicken. It was nearly midnight when she finally managed to slip away from her admirers and join him on the porch outside the hall. "You're very popular," Rylan observed, offering her a cup of punch. "It's novelty, nothing more," Delilah replied. "Next month they'll barely notice me." "I doubt that," he said quietly. The night air was cool, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. From inside came the sounds of music and laughter, but on the porch they were momentarily alone. "Thank you for coming tonight," Delilah said. "I know these gatherings aren't to your taste." "How would you know that?" Rylan asked, curious. "You have the look of a man who prefers solitude to crowds," she replied. "I recognized it because sometimes I feel the same way." "A schoolteacher who prefers solitude. Is that so strange? I love teaching, love watching children discover new ideas. But at the end of the day, I cherish quiet moments with a book or my thoughts." Rylan studied her with new interest. "You continue to surprise me, Delilah Summers." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, smiling. "Good," he decided. "Definitely good." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the town. Silver Creek was transformed by moonlight, the rough edges softened, the promise of what it might become more visible than the reality of what it was. "Will I see you again?" Delilah asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its propriety. "Do you want to?" Rylan countered, his voice low. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Then you will," he promised. "I need to come to town for supplies next week. Perhaps I could call on you, properly," he added. "I'd like that," Delilah said, her heart lifting at the prospect. "Mrs. Wilson appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "There you are, my dear. I was beginning to worry." "Just getting some air, Mrs. Wilson," Delilah explained. "Mr. Wade was kind enough to keep me company." "Indeed," the widow said, her tone making it clear she had opinions about this arrangement. "Well, it's getting late, and you have your first day of school on Monday. We should be going." "Of course," Delilah agreed. She turned to Rylan. "Good night, Mr. Wade. Thank you for the dance." "Good night, Miss Summers," he replied formally, though his eyes conveyed something far less formal. "Until next week." As she walked back to Mrs. Wilson's shop with the older woman chattering beside her, Delilah found herself looking forward to Monday with excitement that had as much to do with Rylan's promised visit as with the start of her teaching career. The following Thursday, Rylan rode into Silver Creek with a wagon load of supplies and a nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He'd spent the past 5 days thinking about Delilah Summers, her courage, her intelligence, the way she seemed to see beyond his carefully constructed barriers. It was madness. They'd spent less than 2 days in each other's company, yet she had taken up residence in his thoughts in a way no one ever had before. School was in session when he arrived, so he attended to his business first, purchasing supplies, arranging for lumber to be delivered to the ranch for winter repairs, checking with the telegraph office for news about the promised federal marshals. Arrived yesterday, the operator informed him. 3 of them staying at the hotel, already met with Sheriff Turner. Any word on Blackwell's whereabouts? Rylan asked. Nothing solid. Rumor has it they hit a stage near Billings 3 days ago. Moving north, maybe. Rylan frowned. If true, that put the gang between Silver Creek and the territorial capital, and potentially closer to his ranch. He completed his errands, then positioned his wagon near the schoolhouse, settling on the seat to wait for the day's lessons to end. Through the open windows, he could hear Delilah's clear voice leading the children in recitation, then asking questions that made them think beyond mere memorization. At 3 o'clock sharp, the door opened and children spilled out into the yard, their voices raised in excitement as they headed home. A few of the older boys noticed Rylan and nudged each other, grinning. He ignored them, his attention fixed on the doorway. Delilah appeared a moment later, locking the schoolhouse behind her. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pinned back in a practical style that nonetheless emphasized the elegant line of her neck. When she turned and saw him, her face brightened with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through Rylan's chest. "Mr. Wade," she called, crossing to where he waited. "What a pleasant surprise." "Not entirely a surprise," he reminded her. "I said I'd call when I came to town." "So you did," Delilah agreed, her green eyes sparkling with pleasure. "Have you been waiting long?" "Not long. I heard you teaching. You're good with the children." "They're eager to learn," she said, "even the older boys, though they pretend otherwise." Rylan climbed down from the wagon. "I thought you might like to take a walk." "It's a fine afternoon." "I'd love to," Delilah replied. "Let me just leave my books at Mrs. Wilson's first." They walked together through town, drawing curious glances from shopkeepers and passers-by. Delilah kept a proper distance between them, conscious of her position as the schoolteacher, but her animated conversation belied the formality of their appearance. 28 students, ages 6 to 16, she told him. "Some have had schooling before, others barely know their letters. I'm grouping them by ability rather than age." "Sounds sensible," Rylan nodded. "What about the ranch children?" "Many can't come to town daily. We're arranging boarding for some with town families," Delilah explained. "For others, I'm preparing lessons they can work on at home, with monthly visits to the school for assessment." They reached the edge of town, where a well-worn path led along Silver Creek itself, the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. By unspoken agreement, they followed it, leaving the curious eyes of the townspeople behind. "You've thought of everything," Rylan commented. "Hardly," Delilah laughed. "I've been improvising since I arrived. But the children are wonderful, even the Donovan boys who tried to put a snake in my desk on Tuesday." "Sounds like you're settling in well," Rylan said, pleased for her yet strangely disappointed that she seemed to need him less than he'd imagined. "Everyone has been kind," she agreed, "but," she hesitated, glancing at him, but I still wake up at night hearing those gunshots," Delilah admitted quietly, "seeing the driver fall. Wondering why I survived when others didn't." Rylan nodded, understanding completely. "The first time I saw a man killed, I was 14. Took months before I stopped seeing it in my dreams." "Does it ever go away completely?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, "but it fades, becomes part of who you are rather than something that defines you." They had reached a bend in the creek where a large cottonwood tree provided shade. Delilah paused, looking out at the water. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, "not just for finding me that day, but for seeing me as I am. Everyone in town looks at me with pity or curiosity." "You never have." "What do I look at you with?" Rylan asked, suddenly needing to know. Delilah met his gaze directly, understanding, as if you know what it's like to face the darkness and continue anyway. The perception in her words struck Rylan deeply. She did see him more clearly than anyone had in years. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I heard the federal marshals arrived," Delilah said, changing the subject. "Do you think they'll catch Blackwell?" "Eventually," Rylan replied. Men like that make enemies everywhere they go. Someone will betray him or he'll get careless. I gave the sheriff descriptions of the men I saw, she said. One had a distinctive scar across his cheek. Another wore a silver watch fob shaped like a horse. Those details help, Rylan assured her. More than you might think. They walked a while longer, talking easily about her students, his ranch, books they'd both read. As the sun began to lower toward the western mountains, Rylan reluctantly suggested they turn back. I should get on the trail before dark, he explained, and you likely have lessons to prepare. Always, Delilah smiled. Will you come to town again soon? I could, Rylan said, or you could visit the ranch some Sunday, bring a picnic. I could show you the north pasture, prettiest view in the county. The invitation surprised them both with its boldness, but Delilah's eyes lit up at the suggestion. I'd like that, she said, though Mrs. Wilson would insist on chaperoning. Bring her too, Rylan found himself saying, though the idea of the talkative widow accompanying them was less than appealing. Next Sunday, then, Delilah suggested. After church. I'll come fetch you both, Rylan agreed, already looking forward to it with an eagerness that would have embarrassed him had anyone else witnessed it. As they walked back into town, their hands brushed accidentally. The brief contact sent a jolt through Rylan that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. By the time they reached Mrs. Wilson's shop, he was fighting an impulse to take Delilah's hand properly in his own, propriety be damned. Thank you for the walk, Delilah said as they stopped at the shop door. It was the perfect end to the school week. Thank you for the company, Rylan replied, until Sunday. Until Sunday, she echoed, her smile warming him more effectively than any fire. As Rylan drove his wagon out of Silver Creek, he found himself whistling a tune he'd heard at the Harvest Social, something he hadn't done in years. The road ahead seemed brighter somehow, despite the gathering dusk. He was halfway home when he noticed the rider following at a distance. Delilah couldn't stop smiling as she helped Mrs. Wilson prepare dinner. The afternoon with Rylan had been everything she'd hoped for, comfortable yet exciting, filled with conversation that ranged from books to ranching to teaching methods. He listened to her ideas with genuine interest, offered thoughtful responses, and made her laugh with dry observations about life in Silver Creek. "My dear, you're positively glowing," Mrs. Wilson commented as she sliced bread. "I take it your walk with Mr. Wade was pleasant." "Very," Delilah admitted. "He's invited us to visit his ranch on Sunday for a picnic. Would you be willing to accompany me?" The older woman's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Both of us." "Well, that's proper at least. Though I must say, it's the first time I've known Rylan Wade to extend such an invitation to anyone, let alone a lady he's barely acquainted with." "We're becoming better acquainted," Delilah said, trying to keep her tone light despite the butterflies that filled her stomach at the thought of seeing Rylan again. "So I see," Mrs. Wilson replied knowingly. "He's a good man, Delilah, keeps to himself, but honest as the day is long. Built that ranch from nothing after his father was killed back in Kansas." "You know about his father?" Delilah asked, curious about Rylan's past. "Only what everyone knows. Rylan doesn't talk about it much." Mrs. Wilson set the bread on the table. "His father was shot by outlaws when Rylan was just a boy. He worked cattle drives for years before coming here to start his own place." Delilah thought about the sadness she'd glimpsed in Rylan's eyes, the way he carried himself like a man who expected trouble and was always ready for it. It made sense now. A boy who'd lost his father to violence would grow into a man wary of the world and its cruelties. Yet despite that wariness, he'd opened his home to her when she needed shelter, had danced with her at the social when he clearly preferred solitude, had invited her to his ranch when it meant disrupting his carefully ordered existence. "I'll be happy to accompany you on Sunday," Mrs. Wilson said, interrupting Delilah's thoughts, "though I might bring my knitting and find a shady spot to sit while you young people explore. These old bones don't climb hills as easily as they once did." Delilah smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. You've been so kind to me since I arrived." "Nonsense," the widow replied warmly. You're exactly what this town needs, a bright young woman with ideas and energy. The children adore you already, and you've only been teaching a week." That night, as Delilah prepared for bed, she found herself thinking not of lesson plans or student progress, but of gray eyes that saw too much and a gentle strength that made her feel safer than she had since her parents died. It was foolish, perhaps, to feel such a connection to a man she barely knew. Yet there was something between them, something that had sparked to life in that terrifying moment in the forest and had grown stronger with each meeting since. As she drifted toward sleep, Delilah wondered what Sunday would bring. Ryland slowed his wagon, alert to the rider who had been following at a distance since he left Silver Creek. It wasn't unusual to encounter others on the road, but this rider had maintained the same distance for miles, neither closing the gap nor falling farther behind. As darkness gathered, Ryland made a decision. He guided the team off the main road onto a narrow trail that led toward a stand of cottonwoods. If the rider was simply traveling in the same direction, he would continue on the main road. If he was following Ryland specifically, he would turn onto the trail as well. Ryland didn't have to wait long for his answer. The rider turned onto the trail, still maintaining his distance but clearly tracking Ryland's movement. Moving quickly, Ryland secured the wagon's brake, grabbed his Winchester rifle from beneath the seat, and stepped into the deepening shadows of the trees. He circled back, moving silently through the underbrush until he had positioned himself behind the approaching rider. The man rode slowly, peering ahead for signs of the wagon. He was dressed like any cowhand or traveler, but the way he sat his horse, alert, balanced for quick movement, spoke of someone accustomed to danger. Ryland stepped onto the trail behind him, leveling the rifle. "That's far enough," he called. "Hands where I can see them." The rider froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Easy, mister. I'm not looking for trouble." "Then why are you following me?" Ryland demanded, keeping the rifle steady. "Wasn't following you exactly," the man said, turning slightly in his saddle. In the fading light, Ryland could see he was younger than expected, mid-twenties perhaps, with a thin face and watchful eyes. "Just keeping an eye on who's coming and going from Silver Creek." "Why?" The young man hesitated before answering. "I work for the federal marshals. Name's Collins. They've got me watching the roads." "Show me some proof," Ryland said, still suspicious. Collins slowly reached into his vest pocket and removed a folded document. "Marshal Davis hired me 3 days ago as a scout. I know the territory." Ryland approached cautiously, took the paper, and unfolded it without lowering his rifle. It appeared to be an official letter of employment from the U.S. Marshal's Service. "Why didn't you identify yourself in town?" Ryland asked, returning the document but keeping the rifle ready. "Marshals want to keep quiet about who's working with them," Collins explained. "Blackwell has friends everywhere. Eyes and ears in most towns." It made sense, though Ryland wasn't entirely convinced. "And you're watching me because—" "Watching everyone," Collins shrugged, "especially anyone who spends time with the schoolteacher. She's the only witness who got a good look at some of Blackwell's men." A chill ran through Ryland. "You think they might come after her?" "Wouldn't put it past them," Collins replied. "Blackwell's been known to silence witnesses. That's why I've been keeping an eye on her, and anyone she associates with." The implication was clear. Ryland's attention to Delilah had been noticed, and not just by the gossipy townspeople. If Blackwell did have spies in Silver Creek, they would know about their walks, their conversations, perhaps even their plans for Sunday. "You should have spoken to me directly," Ryland said, finally lowering his rifle. "Or had the marshal do it." "Like I said, we're being careful who knows what," Collins replied. "Marshal Davis is setting a trap, trying to draw Blackwell in. The less people know about it, the better." "Does Sheriff Turner know about this plan?" "Some of it," Collins admitted. "Not all. Turner's a good man, but he talks too much." Ryland considered this information. If Collins was telling the truth, then Delilah could be in more danger than anyone realized. If he was lying, well, that opened a whole different set of worrying possibilities. "I'm heading back to my ranch," Ryland finally said. You're welcome to ride with me openly instead of skulking behind. Collins smiled thinly. Appreciate the offer, but I'll stick to skulking. It's what they pay me for. Ryland returned to his wagon and continued home, aware that Collins had resumed following at a distance. The encounter left him unsettled, not because of the man himself, but because of what his presence implied. If the marshals were concerned enough about Delilah's safety to have her watched, then the threat was real. When he reached the saddleback, Hank was waiting on the porch, rifle across his knees. "You're late," the older man observed. "Problems in town." "Maybe," Ryland replied, explaining his encounter with Collins as they unloaded supplies from the wagon. Either he's telling the truth and the marshals are worried about Delilah's safety, or he's not what he claims to be. "Could be working for Blackwell himself," Hank suggested, "gathering information." "Thought of that," Ryland nodded. "But the document seemed genuine." "Easy enough to forge a letter," Hank pointed out. "You planning to warn the schoolteacher?" Ryland frowned, considering. If Collins is legitimate, then warning her might interfere with whatever the marshals are planning. If he's not, then warning her might save her life, Hank finished. "She's coming here on Sunday," Ryland said, "her and Mrs. Wilson, for a picnic." Hank raised his eyebrows, but refrained from commenting on the unprecedented nature of this arrangement. Instead, he asked, "You trust this Collins fellow enough to bring her out here, away from town?" "No," Ryland admitted, "but I trust us to keep her safe better than I trust anyone in Silver Creek. If Blackwell does have eyes and ears there, the ranch might be the safest place for her to be." "We'll keep watch," Hank promised. "Make sure no uninvited guests show up for your picnic." That night, Ryland checked and cleaned every firearm on the ranch, placing them strategically around the cabin and barn. He walked the perimeter, making sure approaches were clear and defensible. By the time he finally went to bed, the ranch was as secure as he could make it. Yet as he lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar night sounds, Ryland couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. In inviting Delilah to his home, had he placed her in greater danger? Or was he offering the only real protection he could against a threat that existed whether he acknowledged it or not? One thing was certain. Delilah Summers had become important to him in a way no one had been for years. And that made her both his greatest vulnerability and his strongest motivation to stand against whatever danger might come. Sunday dawned clear and bright with the crisp edge of autumn in the air. Delilah wore her best day dress, a russet-colored poplin that complemented her chestnut hair, and a practical pair of boots suitable for a ranch visit. Mrs. Wilson had packed a generous picnic basket with fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jug of lemonade. "You look lovely, my dear," the widow commented as they waited for Ryland to arrive. "That color brings out the roses in your cheeks." "Thank you," Delilah replied, trying to calm the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. It was just a picnic, she reminded herself. A friendly outing with a man who had shown her kindness. Yet she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse when she heard a wagon approaching outside. Ryland arrived precisely at the agreed time, his wagon freshly washed and a clean blanket spread over the seat. He too had dressed with care, clean denims, a new-looking blue shirt, and his good hat. He helped Mrs. Wilson into the wagon first, then offered his hand to Delilah. "You look nice," he said simply as their eyes met. "So do you," she replied, her hand lingering in his a moment longer than necessary. The drive to the saddleback was filled with pleasant conversation. Mrs. Wilson, never one to allow silence to reign for long, kept them entertained with stories of Silver Creek's early days. Delilah noticed that Ryland seemed more vigilant than usual, his eyes constantly scanning the road and surrounding countryside. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly when Mrs. Wilson paused to catch her breath. "Just cautious," Ryland replied. "Habit." When they arrived at the ranch, Hank greeted them with courtly manners that belied his rough appearance. "Ladies," he said, touching his hat brim, "welcome to the saddleback." "Mr. Hank, you remember Mrs. Wilson," Ryland said, "and this is Miss Summers, Silver Creek's new schoolteacher." "Heard good things about your teaching already, miss," Hank said, helping Mrs. Wilson down from the wagon. "My friend's boy, Tommy Jenkins, says you're the best teacher they've ever had." "That's very kind," Delilah smiled, "though we've only just begun." While Ryland showed Mrs. Wilson to the porch where a comfortable chair had been placed in the shade, Hank spoke quietly to Delilah. "He cleaned the cabin twice yesterday," the old cowboy confided with a twinkle in his eye. "Never seen him so fussed about anything." Delilah felt a warm glow at this information. The idea of Ryland preparing so carefully for their visit touched her deeply. After settling Mrs. Wilson with her knitting and a cup of coffee, Ryland returned to Delilah. "I thought we might ride up to the north pasture," he suggested. "The view is best this time of day." "That sounds wonderful," Delilah agreed. Ryland had saddled 2 horses, his buckskin gelding and a gentle bay mare for Delilah. He helped her mount, then swung into his own saddle with practiced ease. "We won't be gone long," he assured Mrs. Wilson. "Hank will keep you company." "Take your time," the widow called, settling comfortably into her chair. "Mr. Hank has promised to tell me about his days driving cattle up from Texas." As they rode away from the cabin, Delilah felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced since arriving in Montana territory. The day was perfect, sunlight dappling through the pines, the smell of sage and grass filling the air, and beside her, a man whose quiet strength had come to mean more to her with each passing day. "Your ranch is beautiful," she said as they followed a trail that wound upward through scattered pines. "How many acres do you have?" 640, Ryland replied, "a full section. Not large compared to some spreads, but good land with reliable water. Runs about 200 head of cattle now, with room to grow." "You've accomplished so much in 3 years," Delilah observed. "You should be proud." "Getting there," Ryland acknowledged. "Another few years I'll have enough saved to build a proper house. The cabin was only meant to be temporary." They reached the crest of a low hill, and Ryland reined his horse to a stop. "This is it," he said, "north pasture." Delilah caught her breath at the view. Below them stretched a sweeping expanse of grassland, dotted with grazing cattle. Beyond, mountains rose in purple majesty against the blue sky, their peaks still capped with last winter's snow. A stream wound through the pasture, its water gleaming silver in the sunlight. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "This is what I saw when I first rode through here," Ryland told her, something softening in his expression. "Knew right then that I wanted to build something here, place where a man could put down roots." "Or a family," Delilah suggested. "Maybe someday," Ryland agreed, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the view. "For now it's just me and Hank, and a couple of hands during calving season." They dismounted and sat on a flat rock overlooking the pasture, letting the horses graze nearby. For a while they simply enjoyed the view in companionable silence. Delilah found it remarkable that she could feel so comfortable with a man she'd known for such a short time. "How did you become a teacher?" Ryland asked eventually. "My father was a professor," Delilah explained. "He believed in education for women as well as men. When I finished school at 18, I began assisting in the local schoolhouse. After my parents died, teaching seemed the most practical way to support myself." "You could have married," Ryland pointed out. "Pretty girl like you must have had suitors." Delilah smiled at the indirect compliment. "There were a few young men who expressed interest, but I wanted more than just security. I wanted purpose." "And you found that in teaching?" "Yes," she nodded. "There's something wonderful about watching a child's mind open to new ideas, seeing them discover the joy of reading or the satisfaction of solving a difficult problem. It's creating something lasting in a way." Ryland considered this, then gestured toward the pasture below. "That's how I feel about ranching, building something that will last, something worthwhile." "We're not so different then," Delilah observed. "Maybe not," Ryland agreed, his gray eyes warming as they studied her face. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Delilah found herself wondering what it would be like to build something lasting with this man, to share his dreams, his struggles, his triumphs. We should head back, Ryland said reluctantly, breaking the spell. Don't want to leave Mrs. Wilson alone with Hank's stories for too long. Man can talk the hind leg off a mule once he gets started. Delilah laughed, accepting his hand as she rose from the rock. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her, and when their eyes met, she knew Ryland felt it too. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts yet acutely aware of the other's presence. When they arrived, they found Mrs. Wilson and Hank engaged in a spirited discussion about the merits of various pie recipes. "Just in time," Hank called. "Mrs. Wilson's been educating me about the importance of lard in a proper pie crust. And Mr. Hank has been telling me the most fascinating stories about cattle drives," Mrs. Wilson added. "Did you know he once drove 2,000 head from San Antonio to Dodge City?" "Only about 500 times," Ryland said dryly, helping Delilah dismount. "Hank's stories improve with each telling." "Slander," the old cowboy protested good-naturedly. "Every word's gospel truth." They spread the picnic on the porch, enjoying Mrs. Wilson's cooking as the sun reached its zenith. The conversation flowed easily among the four of them, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people at ease in each other's company. After they'd eaten, Ryland offered to show Delilah the barn and corrals. Mrs. Wilson, comfortably settled in her chair, waved them off. "Go along, you two. Mr. Hank is going to teach me how to play checkers." As they walked toward the barn, Ryland seemed to grow more serious. "Delilah," he said, using her first name with a naturalness that pleased her, "there's something I need to tell you." The gravity in his tone made her heart skip. "What is it?" Ryland glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard, then explained his encounter with Collins on the road from Silver Creek. "I'm not sure if he's really working for the marshals or not," he concluded. "But either way, it means Blackwell might be targeting you as a witness." Delilah felt cold despite the warm sun. "Do you think I'm in danger?" "I think it's possible," Ryland said honestly. "The marshals are setting some kind of trap, using the fact that you can identify some of Blackwell's men. But traps can go wrong." "What should I do?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Be vigilant," Ryland advised. "Don't go anywhere alone, especially after dark. Keep your doors locked. If anything seems strange or out of place, tell Sheriff Turner immediately." "Should I be afraid?" Delilah asked, searching his face. Ryland considered his answer carefully. "Healthy caution is good, fear that paralyzes isn't. You survived the stage attack because you kept your wits about you. Do the same now." His confidence in her courage bolstered Delilah's spirits. "I will," she promised. "Thank you for telling me." "I considered not saying anything," Ryland admitted. "Didn't want to frighten you. But you deserve to know what might be happening." "I appreciate your honesty," Delilah said, touched by his concern. "It means a great deal." They had reached the corral, where several horses watched them curiously over the fence rails. Ryland leaned against the weathered wood, his expression troubled. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "maybe you should stay here at the ranch until the marshals catch Blackwell." The suggestion took Delilah by surprise. "Here. But what about the school?" "It's only a few miles," Ryland pointed out. "I could drive you in each morning, pick you up after. You'd be safer here than in town, where Blackwell could have men watching." The offer was tempting, not just for the safety it offered, but for the opportunity to be near Ryland. Yet Delilah hesitated, aware of how such an arrangement would appear to the townspeople. "Mrs. Wilson could come too," Ryland added, reading her thoughts. "The cabin's small, but we could make it work. Hank and I would sleep in the bunkhouse." "It's very generous," Delilah said carefully. "But I'm not sure the town council would approve of their schoolteacher living at a bachelor's ranch, even with Mrs. Wilson as chaperone." "To hell with what they think," Ryland said with sudden fierceness. "Your safety matters more than their gossip." The intensity in his voice warmed Delilah, even as she recognized the impossibility of his suggestion. "I can't jeopardize my position," she explained gently. "Teaching is all I have, all I know how to do." Ryland's expression softened. I understand, but will you at least promise to be careful? And to send word if anything concerns you, day or night. I promise, Delilah agreed, and thank you, Rylan, for caring. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that what she felt for this man went far beyond gratitude or friendship. It terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The remainder of the afternoon passed too quickly. They returned to the porch for more lemonade and Mrs. Wilson's apple pie. Then Ryland showed them his small vegetable garden and the spring that provided the ranch's water. Throughout, Delilah was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the occasional brush of his hand against hers, of the way his eyes sought hers during conversation. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Ryland reluctantly suggested it was time to return to town. "Don't want to be on the road after dark," he explained, helping Mrs. Wilson into the wagon. The drive back was quieter than the journey out, a comfortable silence punctuated by occasional observations about the beauty of the landscape or plans for the coming week. When they reached Silver Creek, the streets were largely deserted, most families at home for Sunday dinner. Ryland stopped the wagon in front of Mrs. Wilson's shop and helped both women down. "Thank you for a lovely day, Mrs. Wilson said, taking the now empty picnic basket. "Your ranch is charming, Mr. Wade. I'll just go inside and put these things away." Her tactical retreat left Rylan and Delilah standing alone beside the wagon, the moment of parting upon them. "Thank you," Delilah said softly, "for everything. It was a beautiful day." "It was," Rylan agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Delilah, He stopped, clearly struggling with words that didn't come easily to a man accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. "Yes," she prompted gently. "Be careful," he finally said, "please." "I will," she promised. "Will you come to town again soon?" "Count on it," Rylan replied with a hint of a smile. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through Delilah's chest. On impulse, she reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Good night, Rylan." "Good night, Delilah," he responded, his fingers curling around hers for a heartbeat before releasing them. As Rylan drove away, Delilah watched until his wagon disappeared around a bend in the road. Only then did she turn and enter the shop, her heart full of emotions she wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. Unknown to either of them, a figure watched from the shadows across the street, noting the tenderness of their farewell with calculated interest. The following week passed in a blur of activity for Delilah. The school was flourishing, with her students making remarkable progress under her guidance. Word of her teaching methods had spread throughout the county, bringing 3 new students from outlying ranches who now boarded with families in town during the week. Rylan came to Silver Creek twice, once on Wednesday to bring Delilah a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, and again on Saturday to walk with her along the creek after school. Each meeting deepened the connection between them, each parting grew more difficult. On Sunday after church, Edward Hamilton approached Delilah with news. "The federal marshals have asked to meet with you," he informed her. "They have questions about what you witnessed during the stagecoach attack." "Of course," Delilah agreed. "When would they like to meet?" "Tomorrow afternoon at the sheriff's office," Hamilton replied. "I've arranged for Mrs. Patterson to cover your classes." That evening, Delilah mentioned the meeting to Mrs. Wilson as they prepared dinner. "Do you think I should send word to Rylan?" she asked. "He was concerned about my safety." "Mr. Wade does seem very protective of you," Mrs. Wilson observed with a knowing smile. "But I'm sure there's no cause for worry. You'll be meeting the marshals in the sheriff's office, in broad daylight in the middle of town." Delilah nodded, though she couldn't shake a vague sense of unease. "You're right, of course, I promised him I'd be careful." "And you are being careful," Mrs. Wilson assured her. "Meeting with lawmen is hardly reckless behavior." The next afternoon, Delilah dismissed her students early and walked to the sheriff's office. The town was quiet, with most people attending to their Monday business inside shops or homes. When she reached the jailhouse, she was surprised to find the door locked. A note tacked to the wood caught her attention. "Miss Summers, meeting moved to hotel dining room for privacy." Marshal Davis. Delilah hesitated, remembering Ryland's warnings about being vigilant. The hotel was only a short distance away, and the dining room would certainly be public enough to be safe. After a moment's consideration, she decided to proceed as directed. The Grand Hotel was Silver Creek's finest establishment, a two-story structure with actual glass windows and a proper dining room that served meals to travelers and townspeople alike. As Delilah entered, she noticed the room was unusually empty for the time of day, with only a single man seated at a corner table. He rose as she approached, a lean, hard-faced man in his 40s with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Miss Summers," he said, extending his hand. "Marshal Davis, thank you for coming." "Where are the others?" Delilah asked, glancing around the empty room. "I was told there were 3 marshals." "Following up leads outside town," Davis explained, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. I have some questions about what you witnessed during the attack." Still uneasy, Delilah took the offered seat. "Sheriff Turner already took my statement." "Yes, I've read it," Davis nodded. "But sometimes details emerge later, after the initial shock wears off. Anything you can remember might help us catch these men." For the next half hour, Delilah answered Davis's questions, describing the attack and the men she had seen as accurately as possible. The marshal took notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "You mentioned a man with a scar across his cheek," Davis said. "Can you describe the scar more specifically?" "It ran from his left temple to his jaw," Delilah replied. "Jagged, like it had been made with a broken bottle, rather than a clean blade." Davis nodded. "That sounds like Joe Keller. He's one of Blackwell's lieutenants." "Have you been able to locate any of them?" Delilah asked. "We're closing in," Davis said, his expression revealing nothing. "Which is why your continued cooperation is so important." Something in his tone made Delilah uncomfortable. "Of course I'll cooperate," she said. "I want these men brought to justice." "Good," Davis replied, "because we need you to do something that might seem unusual." "What is that?" Delilah asked, her unease growing. "We need you to leave town for a few days," Davis explained. "We have information suggesting Blackwell plans to silence you as a witness. The safest place for you would be away from Silver Creek until we can complete our operation." Delilah's heart raced. "Leave town, but what about my students? Where would I go?" "We've arranged a safe location," Davis assured her. "As for your students, their safety might be at risk if Blackwell's men come looking for you at the school. Better they miss a few days of lessons than be caught in the middle of something dangerous." Put that way, it made sense, yet Delilah couldn't shake her growing discomfort with the situation. "I should inform Mrs. Wilson," she said, rising. "And the town council. They need to know why I'm leaving." Davis's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No one can know," he said firmly. "Blackwell has ears everywhere. The fewer people who know about this arrangement, the safer you'll be." Delilah pulled her arm free, alarm bells ringing in her mind. "I'm sorry, Marshal Davis, but this doesn't feel right. I think I should speak with Sheriff Turner before making any decisions." Davis's expression hardened. "Sheriff Turner is part of the problem, Miss Summers. He talks too much. Why do you think I arranged to meet you here instead of at his office?" "I think I should go," Delilah said, backing toward the door. "Perhaps we can continue this discussion tomorrow, with Sheriff Turner present." She turned to leave, only to find her path blocked by a man who had entered silently behind her. A man with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. "Hello, schoolteacher," he grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Remember me?" Delilah's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the bandits from the stagecoach attack. She whirled back toward Davis, only to find him removing his marshal's badge. "Sorry for the deception, Miss Summers," he said without a trace of remorse, "but we do need you to leave town for a while. Just not for the reasons I mentioned." "You're not a marshal," Delilah realized, her mind racing for a way to escape. "No," the man agreed. "Name's Thorne. I work for Mr. Blackwell. And he's very interested in meeting the woman who can identify his men." People know where I am, Delilah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. They'll look for me. They think you're meeting with marshals, Thorne pointed out. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, you'll be long gone. The scarred man Keller moved closer, blocking any chance of escape. Outside, nice and quiet, he ordered. Horses are waiting in the alley. One sound and I cut that pretty throat. Understood. Delilah nodded, her mind racing. They were going to take her from town in broad daylight, using the marshals' meeting as cover. It was a bold plan, and one that might well succeed if she didn't find a way to alert someone. As Keller pushed her toward the back door, Delilah caught sight of a familiar figure through the front window, Rylan, dismounting from his horse directly in front of the hotel. Relief flooded through her. He must have come to town and heard about her meeting with the marshals. Move, Keller growled, shoving her roughly. Delilah stumbled deliberately, buying precious seconds as Rylan entered the hotel lobby. As Keller grabbed her arm to pull her upright, she met Rylan's eyes through the dining room doorway. Recognition, then alarm flashed across his face as he took in the scene. Rylan, Delilah shouted, driving her elbow hard into Keller's stomach. What followed happened so quickly Delilah could barely process it. Keller cursed and reached for his gun. Thorne spun toward the lobby, drawing his own weapon. Rylan dove for cover as the first shots rang out. Delilah dropped to the floor, crawling beneath a table as bullets splintered wood around her. Through the chaos, she heard shouts from the street, more gunshots, the crash of breaking glass. Then strong hands were pulling her from beneath the table, and she found herself looking into Rylan's concerned face. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No," she gasped. "They were pretending to be marshals." "Trying to take me." "I know," Rylan said grimly. "Real marshals caught the third man watching your school," he talked. More men were flooding into the hotel now, Sheriff Turner and his deputies, along with 3 hard-looking men who wore authentic marshals' badges. Keller lay motionless by the back door, blood pooling beneath him. Thorne was being handcuffed, his shoulder bleeding from a gunshot wound. "Got here just in time," said one of the marshals, approaching Rylan and Delilah. "Wade, your warning about that Collins fellow set us looking in the right direction. Turned out he was Blackwell's man, watching the schoolteacher to plan this abduction." Rylan nodded, his arm still protectively around Delilah's shoulders. "Where's Blackwell?" "Still at large," the marshal admitted. "But with these 2 captured, we're getting closer. They'll talk eventually." Sheriff Turner joined them, looking shaken. "Miss Summers, I'm so sorry. They intercepted my message to the real marshals, knew exactly when and where you'd be." "It's not your fault," Delilah assured him, though her voice trembled. "They were very convincing." "You need to come to the office to make a statement," Turner said. "Then I think you should stay somewhere safer than Mrs. Wilson's for a few days. At least until we're sure Blackwell doesn't have more men in the area." "She can stay at the Saddleback," Rylan said immediately, "with Mrs. Wilson as chaperone, of course." Turner nodded. "That's probably best. Isolated enough to see trouble coming but defensible." The next hours passed in a blur. Delilah gave her statement to the real marshals, describing everything that had happened with as much detail as she could remember. Mrs. Wilson was informed of the situation and quickly packed essentials for both of them. By sunset, they were in Rylan's wagon, heading away from Silver Creek toward the safety of the Saddleback Ranch. "How did you know?" Delilah asked Rylan as they drove through the gathering dusk. "How did you know I was in danger?" "I didn't for certain," he admitted, "but after our talk about Collins, I spoke with Sheriff Turner. He agreed something didn't feel right. When the real marshals arrived yesterday, we realized Collins was an imposter. They've been looking for him since. Then today, I came to town for supplies and heard you were meeting with the marshals. But when I spoke to the lead marshal, he said they hadn't arranged any meeting. That's when we knew something was wrong." "You saved my life," Delilah said softly. "Again." Rylan glanced at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Let's hope it doesn't become a habit." Despite everything, Delilah found herself smiling at his dry humor. "I'll try to stay out of life-threatening situations in the future." See that you do, he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. My heart can only take so much. The simple statement, delivered in his matter-of-fact way, conveyed more than any flowery declaration could have. In the back of the wagon, Mrs. Wilson pretended not to hear, but Delilah saw the satisfied smile that crossed the older woman's face. When they reached the ranch, Hank had already prepared for their arrival. The cabin was warm, with a stew bubbling on the stove and fresh bedding on Ryland's bed and in the loft above. Ladies, get the cabin, Hank announced. Ryland and I will bunk in the outbuilding. But we'll be close enough to hear if there's trouble. After a simple meal, Ryland showed Mrs. Wilson to the bedroom while Delilah prepared to sleep in the loft. Before leaving them for the night, he checked every window and door, making sure all were securely latched. We'll take turns keeping watch, he told Delilah as she stood at the bottom of the ladder to the loft. You're safe here. I know, she said, reaching out to touch his arm. Thank you, Ryland, for everything. He covered her hand with his own. Get some rest, it's been a difficult day. But as Delilah lay in the darkness of the loft, listening to Mrs. Wilson's gentle snoring from the bedroom below, sleep eluded her. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind, the false marshal, Keller's scarred face, the gunshots that had nearly ended her life, and Ryland appearing like an avenging angel just when she needed him most. It was becoming increasingly clear that what she felt for him went far beyond gratitude or even friendship. In the short time she'd known him, Ryland Wade had become essential to her in a way no one had been since her parents died. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Eventually she rose and wrapped a quilt around her shoulders, descending the ladder quietly to avoid waking Mrs. Wilson. She needed air, needed to clear her head and settle her racing thoughts. The cabin door opened with barely a creak, and Delilah stepped onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. A three-quarter moon bathed the ranch in silver light, casting long shadows behind the buildings and corrals. Couldn't sleep, came Ryland's quiet voice from the corner of the porch. Delilah started slightly, then saw him sitting on a bench, rifle across his knees. No, she admitted, too many thoughts. Understandable, he nodded. It's been a hell of a day. She moved to sit beside him, drawing the quilt more tightly around her shoulders against the night chill. Every time I close my eyes, I see Keller's face, hear the gunshots. It'll fade, Ryland assured her. Give it time. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the moonlight play across the landscape. Delilah was acutely aware of Ryland beside her, his steady presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. I was so frightened, she finally confessed, not just of dying but of never seeing you again. The words hung in the night air between them, more revealing than she had intended. Ryland turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Delilah, he said, her name almost a sigh on his lips, I was terrified of the same thing. Their eyes met, and Delilah felt something shift between them, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, Ryland leaned toward her. His hand came up to gently cup her cheek, and then his lips were on hers, soft and questioning at first, then more insistent as she responded. The kiss was everything Delilah had imagined and more, tender yet passionate, conveying things that words couldn't express. When they finally parted, she felt breathless, her heart racing in her chest. I've wanted to do that since the harvest social, Ryland admitted, his voice husky. I've wanted you to, Delilah replied, smiling in the moonlight. Ryland's arm circled her shoulders, drawing her closer against his side. What happens now, he asked, with Blackwell still out there with your teaching? I don't know, Delilah answered honestly, but I know that what I feel for you is real, Ryland. More real than anything I've felt in a very long time. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Same for me, he said simply. We'll figure it out together. They remained on the porch until the moon began its descent toward the western mountains, talking quietly about everything and nothing. His plans for the ranch, her ideas for the school, memories of their childhoods, hopes for the future. When Delilah finally returned to the loft, her heart was lighter despite the dangers that still surrounded them. Whatever came next, she would face it with Rylan beside her, and that made all the difference. For 3 days, Delilah and Mrs. Wilson remained at the Saddleback, while in Silver Creek the marshals continued their search for James Blackwell. The time at the ranch took on a dreamlike quality for Delilah, mornings helping Mrs. Wilson prepare meals, afternoons exploring the property with Rylan, evenings gathered around the fireplace sharing stories and laughter. Despite the circumstances that had brought them there, Delilah found herself happier than she'd been since before her parents' deaths. Each day deepened her feelings for Rylan, each shared moment confirmed what her heart already knew: she was falling in love with him. On the 4th morning, Sheriff Turner rode out to the ranch with news. "Marshals caught another of Blackwell's men yesterday," he reported as they gathered on the porch. "Fellow named Davis, the real one, not the imposter. He had interesting information." "About Blackwell?" Rylan asked. Turner nodded. "Seems our notorious outlaw isn't a stranger to these parts after all. Davis claims Blackwell used to live in Silver Creek under a different name. Left about 4 years ago after some dispute, swearing revenge on the town." "Did Davis say what name Blackwell used here?" Rylan pressed. "That's the interesting part," Turner replied. "Says Blackwell was known as Edmund Hamilton." Delilah gasped. "Edmund, but that's—" "Edward Hamilton's brother," Turner confirmed, "head of our town council." Rylan's expression darkened. "Are you saying Edward Hamilton is connected to these attacks?" "Don't know yet," Turner admitted. "Davis claims the brothers had a falling out. Edward forced Edmund out of their business partnership, took everything. Edmund left town, reinvented himself as James Blackwell, and has been working his way back ever since, gathering men, building his reputation. And the attacks around Silver Creek are his revenge," Rylan concluded. "Looks that way," Turner agreed. "Marshals are questioning Edward Hamilton now, if he's been in contact with his brother, helping plan these raids." "Then the whole town has been at risk because of a family feud," Delilah said, horrified by the implications. "What about Miss Summers?" Rylan asked. "Is it safe for her to return to town?" Turner considered the question. "Marshals believe with Thorne and Keller in custody, and Davis talking, Blackwell's operation is crippled. But they haven't caught the man himself yet." "Then she stays here," Rylan said firmly. "Actually," Turner said, "they'd like Miss Summers to return. School's been closed 3 days already and parents are getting restless. Plus, the marshals think having her back in town might draw Blackwell out if he's still fixated on silencing her." "You want to use her as bait?" Rylan demanded, anger flashing in his eyes. "They'd have men watching her constantly," Turner assured him. "She'd never be alone." "It's too dangerous," Rylan insisted. "Blackwell's already tried once, he'll try again." "I should have a say in this," Delilah interjected, looking between the two men. "It's my life at stake." Both men turned to her, Turner apologetic, Rylan concerned. "I want to help catch this man," Delilah said firmly. "If returning to Silver Creek and resuming my teaching will help do that, then that's what I'll do." "Delilah," Rylan began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I can't hide forever, Rylan. My students need me, and I refuse to let fear rule my life." She softened her tone. "But I would feel safer if you were nearby." Rylan's expression eased slightly at her words. "I'll get a room at the hotel," he decided. "Stay in town until this is resolved." "That won't be necessary," Turner said. "Marshals want to set up a proper trap. They need someone Blackwell won't recognize to stay with Miss Summers, pose as a relative perhaps." "I'll do it," Rylan volunteered immediately. Turner shook his head. "Won't work. You're too well known, and Blackwell would be suspicious of any sudden houseguests. They're bringing in a female agent from Helena, a woman who's worked with them before on delicate operations." Rylan clearly didn't like the plan, but he recognized the logic behind it. "When?" he asked tersely. "Tomorrow," Turner replied. "I'll escort Miss Summers and Mrs. Wilson back to town in the morning. The agent will arrive on the afternoon stage." That evening, after Mrs. Wilson had retired, Rylan and Delilah walked to the corral, their fingers intertwined. The sun was setting, painting the sky in vivid streaks of orange and purple that reflected in the still water of the horse trough. "I don't like this plan," Rylan said as they leaned against the corral fence. "Too many things can go wrong." "I know," Delilah acknowledged, "but it might be the only way to end this. To catch Blackwell and make Silver Creek safe again." Rylan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Delilah, these past few days, having you here," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before." "Neither have I," Delilah admitted softly. "When this is over," Rylan continued, "when Blackwell is caught and you're safe, I want you to consider something." "What's that?" she asked, her heart quickening. "Staying here with me." The words came out in a rush, as if he feared his courage might fail if he hesitated. "Not right away, I know you need to finish the school term, but eventually. We could build something together, Delilah." "Something lasting." Joy bloomed in Delilah's chest, bright and warm. "Are you asking me to marry you, Rylan Wade?" "I'm asking you to think about it," he replied, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I know it's soon. No, I'm not the most educated man, or the wealthiest, but I'd spend every day trying to make you happy." Delilah reached up to touch his cheek, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You already make me happy," she told him. "And yes, I'll think about it, but I already know my answer will be yes." Rylan's face transformed with a smile so radiant it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I'll come to town every day," he promised. "Stay close until this is over." "I know you will," Delilah murmured against his chest, "and knowing that will help me be brave." They stood together as darkness fell, reluctant to end this moment, to face the uncertainty that tomorrow would bring. But when they finally returned to the cabin, a sense of peace had settled over Delilah. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them with the knowledge that Rylan loved her, and that a future together awaited them once Blackwell was brought to justice. The return to Silver Creek the next morning was tense. Sheriff Turner led the way, with Rylan riding alongside the wagon carrying Delilah and Mrs. Wilson. Every shadow, every bend in the road seemed to hold potential danger. When they reached town, Turner escorted them directly to Mrs. Wilson's shop. "Marshal Bennett and 2 deputies are watching the street," he informed them. "The female agent, Miss Carter, will arrive on the 2 o'clock stage. Until then, stay inside with the doors locked." Rylan was reluctant to leave, but Turner needed him to make a statement at the jailhouse. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised Delilah. "Remember, don't open the door for anyone you don't know." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though her stomach knotted with anxiety as he rode away. The hours passed slowly. Mrs. Wilson tried to distract Delilah with talk of dress patterns and plans for the upcoming Christmas pageant, but her thoughts kept returning to the danger that still lurked. Was Blackwell watching the shop even now? Would he risk another attempt to silence her, knowing the marshals were in town? At precisely 2 o'clock, the stagecoach rumbled into Silver Creek. From the window, Delilah watched as passengers disembarked, a middle-aged couple, a young man with a carpetbag, and finally, a woman in a sensible traveling suit and hat. This last passenger was met by Marshal Bennett, who escorted her directly to Mrs. Wilson's shop. The knock at the door was the agreed-upon signal, 3 quick taps, then 2 slower ones. Mrs. Wilson opened it to admit Marshal Bennett and the woman. "Miss Summers, Mrs. Wilson," Bennett said, "this is Miss Sarah Carter. She'll be staying with you until we apprehend Blackwell." Sarah Carter was younger than Delilah had expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent blue eyes and light brown hair pinned neatly beneath her hat. She carried a small valise and wore a Derringer pistol in a concealed holster at her wrist, visible only when she extended her hand in greeting. "Pleased to meet you both," she said. "I understand we're to pose as cousins, Miss Summers." "Yes," Delilah confirmed, "visiting from Helena." "I've worked with the marshals before," Miss Carter explained once Bennett had left. "My late husband was a Pinkerton detective. I learned the trade from him." The woman's competence was reassuring. She quickly surveyed the shop and living quarters above, noting escape routes and potential defensive positions. "We'll establish a routine," she told Delilah. "You'll teach as usual. I'll accompany you to and from the school. We'll appear to be simply enjoying each other's company while I visit." "And if Blackwell makes an attempt, Mrs. Wilson asked worriedly. "Then we'll be ready," Miss Carter replied, patting her concealed weapon, "and so will Marshal Bennett's men." The next morning, Delilah resumed teaching with Miss Carter, seated at the back of the classroom, ostensibly observing teaching methods to implement in Helena. The children were curious about the visitor but soon focused on their lessons. Ryland came to the schoolhouse at midday, bringing lunch for Delilah and Miss Carter. "Any sign of trouble?" he asked quietly as they ate in the schoolyard, watching the children play. "Nothing," Miss Carter reported, "but it's early yet. Blackwell will want to assess the situation before making a move." For 3 days they maintained the charade. Delilah taught her classes with Miss Carter in attendance. They walked visibly through town, shopped at the general store, attended church on Sunday. Ryland divided his time between the ranch and Silver Creek, never straying far from Delilah when she was in town. On the 4th day, as Delilah was dismissing her students, a boy of about 12 approached her desk. "Miss Summers, Mr. Hamilton asked me to give you this." He handed her a folded note. "Thank you, Thomas," Delilah said, assuming the message was from Edward Hamilton regarding school business. She unfolded it as the last children filed out. The contents made her blood run cold. "If you want to see Ryland Wade alive again, come to the old Miller cabin at sunset. Come alone or he dies. J.B." Miss Carter noticed her distress immediately. "What is it?" Wordlessly, Delilah handed her the note. The agent read it quickly, her expression darkening. "When did you last see Wade?" "This morning," Delilah replied, fear clutching at her heart. "He was going to check on his ranch, then return by mid-afternoon." "It's nearly 4 now," Miss Carter observed. "And the Miller cabin is about 2 miles east of town, if I recall correctly." Delilah nodded. "An abandoned homestead. Ryland mentioned it once, said it was a hideout for outlaws passing through." "We need to inform Marshal Bennett," Miss Carter decided. "This is likely a trap, but we can't ignore the possibility that Blackwell has actually captured Wade." They hurried to the jailhouse, where Bennett read the note with a grim expression. "Could be a bluff," he said. "But Wade hasn't been seen in town all afternoon." "I need to go," Delilah insisted. "If Ryland's in danger because of me." "Absolutely not," Bennett cut her off. "That's exactly what Blackwell wants." "Then what do you suggest?" Delilah demanded. "I can't simply abandon Ryland." Bennett considered the situation. "We'll send a man to the Saddleback, see if Wade's there. Meanwhile, I'll take a small party toward the Miller cabin, scout it out without being seen." "And if Ryland is there," Delilah pressed, "if Blackwell is holding him." "Then we'll handle it," Bennett assured her. "But you're staying here under guard." As Bennett organized his men, Delilah paced the jailhouse, sick with worry. Had Blackwell somehow captured Ryland on his way back to town? Was he hurt or worse? The thought was unbearable. An hour later, the marshal returned with troubling news. "Wade's horse is at the livery stable," he reported. "Stableman says it was brought in by a stranger around noon, said Wade had sent him with the horse while he took care of business outside town." "And the Miller cabin?" Delilah asked anxiously. "We spotted 2 men on guard outside," Bennett replied. "Definitely Blackwell's gang, couldn't see inside without getting too close." "Then he does have Ryland," Delilah said, her worst fears confirmed. "I have to go." "Miss Summers," Bennett said firmly, "I understand your concern, but walking into Blackwell's trap won't help Wade. It will only give Blackwell 2 hostages instead of 1. "What's your plan, then?" Miss Carter asked pragmatically. "We're positioning men around the cabin now," Bennett explained. "At dusk we'll move in, but it's risky. If Blackwell sees us coming, Wade could be dead before we reach him." "Unless Blackwell is distracted," Delilah said slowly, an idea forming. "Unless he gets what he's expecting." Bennett shook his head. if you're suggesting what I think you are. I could approach the cabin openly, Delilah pressed. Keep Blackwell's attention focused on me while your men move into position. Too dangerous, Bennett insisted. What if I went with her? Miss Carter suggested. I could pose as a concerned friend, accompanying her partway before appearing to turn back. Bennett considered the proposal, clearly torn between the need to rescue Rylan and the risk to Delilah. It's not standard procedure, he said reluctantly. Neither is allowing an innocent man to die when we could prevent it, Delilah countered. Please, Marshal Bennett, Rylan has saved my life twice now. Let me try to save his. After further discussion, a plan was formulated. Delilah would approach the cabin shortly before sunset, with Miss Carter accompanying her to within sight of the structure before apparently turning back. Meanwhile, Bennett and his deputies would use the distraction to surround the cabin. You'll wear this, Bennett said, handing Delilah a small Derringer pistol. It's not much, but it might make the difference if things go wrong. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Turner arrived with unexpected news. Just got word from Helena, he reported. Edward Hamilton has been arrested. He's been corresponding with his brother for months, providing information about stage schedules, railroad payrolls, everything Blackwell needed. So the town council president was complicit all along, Bennett said grimly. That explains how Blackwell's gang has been so successful. Hamilton's confessed everything, Turner added. Says his brother threatened to expose some financial improprieties if he didn't cooperate. But he claims he never intended for anyone to be killed. Delilah thought of her initial meeting with Edward Hamilton, how he had welcomed her to Silver Creek with apparent warmth. All the while he had been betraying the town, enabling the violence that had claimed so many lives, including those on her stagecoach. Did Hamilton know about the plan to abduct me? She asked. He says no, Turner replied. That was Blackwell's idea alone, after he learned you could identify some of his men. This information did little to ease Delilah's anxiety about the current situation. If anything, it confirmed that James Blackwell, formerly Edmund Hamilton, was calculating and ruthless, willing to go to any lengths to protect himself and punish those he believed had wronged him. As sunset approached, Delilah found herself in a buckboard with Miss Carter, driving slowly toward the Miller cabin. She wore a simple dress and shawl, with the Derringer hidden in a concealed pocket. Her heart pounded with fear, not for herself but for Rylan. Remember, Miss Carter said quietly as they neared their destination, your job is simply to keep Blackwell's attention. Don't try anything heroic. The marshals will handle the rest. I understand, Delilah nodded, but if Rylan is hurt, then the best thing you can do is stay calm and follow the plan, Miss Carter insisted. We'll get both of you out safely. They stopped the buckboard at the agreed-upon distance from the cabin. Miss Carter made a show of arguing with Delilah, trying to dissuade her from proceeding alone, then reluctantly turned back as planned, ostensibly returning to town. In reality, she would circle through the woods to join the marshals positioned around the cabin. Delilah continued on foot, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. The Miller cabin stood in a small clearing, its weathered logs and sagging roof testament to years of abandonment. Smoke curled from the crooked chimney and a single horse was tethered outside. As she approached, the door opened. A man she had never seen stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. That's far enough, he called. Hands where I can see them. Delilah stopped, raising her hands. I got your message, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite her fear. Where is Rylan Wade? Inside, the man replied. You'll see him soon enough. Walk slowly toward me, no sudden moves. She obeyed, scanning the cabin's exterior for any sign of the marshals, but the surrounding woods remained still and silent. Had something gone wrong with the plan? When Delilah reached the porch steps, the man motioned her inside with his rifle. Boss is waiting, he said. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by a small fire in the hearth and a lantern on a rough-hewn table. A man stood beside the fireplace, tall and lean, with graying hair and cold eyes that studied her with calculated interest. Miss Summers, he said, I appreciate your punctuality. "Where is Rylan?" Delilah demanded, looking around the one-room cabin. In response, Blackwell, for it could only be he, gestured toward a corner. Rylan sat on the floor, hands bound behind him, a bruise darkening one cheekbone. His eyes met Delilah's, a mixture of relief and dismay in their gray depths. "Delilah," he said hoarsely, "you shouldn't have come." "I had to," she replied simply. "Touching," Blackwell commented dryly, "the school teacher and the rancher. I must say you've caused me considerable inconvenience, Miss Summers. My men in custody, my operation disrupted." "Your brother in jail," Delilah added boldly. "Edward's been arrested. He's told the authorities everything." A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwell's face, quickly masked. "Edward was always weak," he said dismissively, "but his usefulness had ended anyway. Silver Creek has paid its debt to me." "Debt?" Delilah questioned, trying to keep him talking, to give the marshals more time to move into position. "For what? Your brother taking your share of the business." Blackwell laughed without humor. "Is that what Edward told them, that it was about money?" He shook his head. "No, Miss Summers, it was about something far more valuable, my wife. Edward stole her, married her after forcing me out of town with trumped-up accusations. She died in childbirth a year later." The revelation stunned Delilah. This campaign of terror, the deaths of innocent people, all stemming from a personal betrayal years earlier. "So you've been punishing an entire town for your brother's actions," she said, "killing people who never harmed you." "Collateral damage," Blackwell shrugged. "Silver Creek protected Edward, made him respectable while I was branded an outlaw. They deserve what they got." "And what about us?" Rylan asked, drawing Blackwell's attention. "Neither of us was even here 4 years ago. What's your justification for harming us?" Blackwell turned toward him. "You, mister. Wade simply had the misfortune of caring about the wrong woman. As for Miss Summers," his cold gaze returned to Delilah, "you could identify my men, that made you dangerous." "And now," Delilah asked, her hand inching toward the hidden derringer, "what do you plan to do with us?" "Originally I intended to kill you both," Blackwell admitted with chilling casualness. "But plans change. With Edward arrested, I need leverage. Hostages will serve that purpose nicely as I leave the territory." Outside, a twig snapped. Blackwell's head jerked toward the window. "Check that," he ordered the man with the rifle. As the henchman moved toward the door, Delilah made her decision. She pulled the derringer from its hiding place and aimed it directly at Blackwell. "Don't move," she commanded. Blackwell's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "You won't shoot me," he said confidently. "You don't have it in you, schoolteacher." "Try me," Delilah replied, her hand steady. "Untie Rylan now." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Blackwell smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down Delilah's spine. "As you wish," he said, moving slowly toward Rylan. Instead of untying him, however, Blackwell drew a knife from his boot and pressed it to Rylan's throat. "Drop the gun, Miss Summers, or I cut his throat before your eyes." Delilah hesitated, torn between her only advantage and Rylan's immediate safety. The henchman had turned back from the door, his rifle now trained on her. "Shoot him, Delilah," Rylan urged, despite the blade at his neck. "Don't worry about me." 5 seconds, Blackwell warned. 4, 3. "All right," Delilah conceded, lowering the derringer. "Don't hurt him." "Wise decision," Blackwell nodded to his man. "Take her weapon." As the henchman moved toward Delilah, gunfire suddenly erupted outside. The cabin window shattered, sending glass flying across the room. U.S. "Marshals," came Bennett's voice, "throw down your weapons." The henchman swung his rifle toward the window. A shot rang out and he crumpled to the floor. Blackwell yanked Rylan to his feet, using him as a shield with the knife still at his throat. "Back off, Marshal," Blackwell shouted. "Or Wade dies right now." Delilah stood frozen, the derringer still in her hand but lowered to her side. Blackwell's attention was divided between Rylan and the broken window, his back partially to her. In that moment she made the most difficult decision of her life. Raising the derringer, Delilah aimed carefully and fired. The shot echoed in the confined space. Blackwell jerked, the knife falling from his hand as he staggered forward. Rylan wrenched away from him, diving to the side as Blackwell collapsed to his knees, blood spreading across his shoulder where Delilah's bullet had struck. The door burst open, and marshals flooded into the cabin. They secured Blackwell, who was cursing and clutching his wounded shoulder. Delilah rushed to Rylan, her hands shaking as she worked to untie the ropes binding his wrists. "Are you all right?" she asked, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," Rylan assured her, pulling her into his arms once his hands were free. "Just a few bruises. Delilah, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I was terrified," she confessed against his chest, "when I saw that knife at your throat." Marshal Bennett approached them as his men dragged Blackwell outside. "That was quite a shot, Miss Summers," he said admiringly. "Don't think I've ever seen a schoolteacher handle herself so well in a crisis." "Let's hope she never has to again," Rylan said firmly, his arm protectively around Delilah's shoulders. "Is it over, truly over?" "Blackwell will hang," Bennett confirmed. "Between Miss Summers' testimony, Edward Hamilton's confession, and the statements from the men we've already captured, there's no doubt about the outcome. Silver Creek can rest easy now." As they emerged from the cabin into the gathering dusk, Delilah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The nightmare that had begun with the stagecoach attack was finally ending. James Blackwell, or Edmund Hamilton, as he had once been known, would face justice for his crimes. But more importantly, Rylan was safe beside her, his hand warm around hers as they walked toward the buckboard where Miss Carter waited. "You know," Rylan said quietly as they reached the vehicle, "I still have a question to ask you, one I never got a proper answer to." Delilah looked up at him, her heart full. "What's that?" "Will you marry me, Delilah Summers? Build a life with me at the Saddleback?" In the golden light of the setting sun, with the shadows of fear finally receding, Delilah's answer came easily. "Yes," Rylan weighed, "yes, with all my heart." The wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Silver Creek and new leaves adorned the cottonwoods along the river. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the schoolhouse decorated with ribbons and blossoms for the reception. In the months since Blackwell's capture, much had changed. Edward Hamilton had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in his brother's crimes. James Blackwell himself awaited hanging in the territorial prison. The remaining members of his gang had either been captured or had fled the territory. Silver Creek was rebuilding, the shadow of fear lifted from its streets. And at the center of this renewal were the schoolteacher and the rancher whose love had blossomed amid danger. Delilah had continued teaching through the winter and spring terms, riding to and from the Saddleback each day with Rylan or Hank as escort. With her salary and Rylan's growing success with the ranch, they had begun construction on a proper house, larger than the cabin, with a dedicated study where Delilah could prepare lessons and read from the growing library they were building together. The wedding itself was simple but beautiful. Delilah wore a gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, her chestnut hair adorned with a crown of spring flowers. Rylan, standing tall and proud in a new suit, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Mrs. Wilson, who had become like a mother to Delilah, wept openly as the couple exchanged vows. Hank stood as Rylan's best man, his weathered face softened with emotion for the young rancher he'd come to regard as a son. "I, Rylan, take you, Delilah, to be my wife," Rylan said, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Delilah repeated the same vows, her green eyes never leaving his gray ones as she promised herself to him for life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled townspeople seemed to echo the joy in her own heart. The reception lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and toasts to the newlyweds' happiness. As twilight descended, Rylan led Delilah outside for a moment of quiet amid the celebration. "Happy Mrs. Wade?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Delilah replied, resting her head against his chest. When I came west, I was only seeking purpose, a way to rebuild my life after losing my parents. I never expected to find love as well. When you first arrived, battered and frightened from the stagecoach attack, I never imagined we'd end up here, Rylan admitted. I'd convinced myself the frontier was no place for love, that I was better off alone. And now, Delilah asked, looking up at him. Now I know better, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Now I know that having you beside me makes everything else possible. As they stood together in the gathering dusk, the sounds of celebration drifting from the schoolhouse behind them, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of the stagecoach attack to the comfort of Ryland's cabin, from quiet walks along Silver Creek to desperate confrontations with Blackwell, every step had led them here, to love, to partnership, to the promise of a future built together. "Do you remember that night on your porch?" she asked softly, "after the attempt to kidnap me?" "Every moment," Ryland nodded. "I was so afraid," Delilah confessed, "not just of Blackwell but of my feelings for you. They seemed too intense, too sudden." "I know," Ryland said. "I felt the same way. Scared me more than facing down outlaws." Delilah laughed softly. "And look at us now." "Look at us now," he echoed, bending to kiss her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Later that night, as they rode toward the saddleback, toward home, Delilah felt a sense of completion she had never known before. The ranch house was still under construction, the cabin small, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the man beside her, the life they would build together, the love that had found them both when they least expected it. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Wades settled into the rhythm of their shared life. Delilah continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families moved to Silver Creek, drawn by the railroad's expansion and the town's newfound safety. Ryland's ranch prospered, his cattle herd increasing, his reputation as one of the territory's most successful young ranchers spreading. Their new house was completed just before the first snow, a comfortable two-story structure with wide porches and ample windows to capture the spectacular views. Inside, Delilah created a home filled with books, music, and warmth. Ryland added his own touches, handcrafted furniture, a stone fireplace, a rocking chair for the porch where they could watch the sunset together. When spring arrived again, bringing with it the first anniversary of their wedding, Delilah had a special announcement for her husband. As they sat on that porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, she took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Rylan," she said, her voice soft with wonder, "we're going to have a child." The joy that transformed his face was something Delilah knew she would remember forever. Rylan gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "A child," he repeated in awe, "our child." "Due in autumn," Delilah confirmed. "Just in time for harvest." As twilight deepened around them, they talked of the future, of the baby they would welcome, of the family they would raise in this house, on this land. They spoke of hopes and dreams, of the legacy they would build together. And when night fell completely, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on velvet, Ryland turned to Delilah with a question that had lingered since their earliest days together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming west, all you went through to get here?" Delilah considered the question, thinking of the stagecoach attack that had nearly claimed her life, the fear and danger that had followed. Then she thought of the classroom full of eager children, the community that had embraced her, and most of all, the man beside her, her partner, her husband, the father of the child growing beneath her heart. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "Every step, every fear, every danger led me to you, led me home." Ryland smiled, drawing her close as they gazed out at the ranch, their ranch spreading before them in the moonlight. "Home," he repeated softly. "That's what you are to me, Delilah Wade, my home, my heart." In the quiet of the Montana night, surrounded by the life they were building together, Delilah knew she had found what she had sought when she boarded that ill-fated stagecoach so many months ago, not just purpose, but love. A love born in danger, tested by fire, and now flowering into a future filled with promise. A love that would last a lifetime.